Welcome to the Liberated Leader podcast. I'm your hostess, B. Chan. Together, we'll connect with leaders in the psychedelic space and explore the creations they birthed into this world, all in hopes to bring the psychedelic renaissance into the 21st century and spread the message of inner healing. Because when we heal ourselves, we heal the world. So, let's get liberated. Hello and welcome. So today we have another guest with us. His name is Michael Oliver. He is a leader, community builder, and psychedelic practitioner based in Vancouver, Canada. And Michael is currently the volunteer coordinator and executive assistant for MAPS Canada, and is also the co-founder of the Flying Sage, a psychedelic community of healers and educators. Michael offers transformation to leaders, entrepreneurs, and change makers who are seeking to self-actualize and step into their own transformative leadership journey. Welcome to the pod, Michael.
Thank you so much. So awesome to be here.
Yes, super excited to have you. So how Michael and I met, we were actually introduced by a mutual friend, Dana Harvey. And I think the first time we chatted, I don't know if you knew this, I knew that you worked at MAPS, but I had no idea that you had a community and had plans to build out education for harm reduction. So I was like pleasantly surprised when we were getting onto that topic. I was like, oh, this guy's cool.
That's funny. Yeah, no, I it's only been recently that I've kind of been focusing on the pivot and expanding, so that makes sense.
Amazing stuff. So we're just going to launch right in here. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and how your journey came to be the current version of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess starting from the beginning, I was born here in Canada, then I moved to England for about 8 years. I lived there, and then I came back to Vancouver, and then I lived here for like most of my life that I can remember. So went to high school here. And I'd say like high school is probably where my psychedelic journey started. Towards the end of high school in grade 11 and 12 is when I started experimenting with substances. You know, as you're a kid, you're always going out to parties and doing different things. And I've always been a curious guy. So aside from the usual suspects like alcohol and cannabis, I also actually had a friend of mine at my school that proposed the idea of trying mushrooms together. And so I remember that was the first psychedelic experience that I had, and I had it in my home at the time with my friend. He was kind of my trip sitter, and yeah, it was a very interesting, crazy experience. I remember just being amazed at the visual aspect of it in particular. It was a really visual journey for me, and yeah, just the most not without having gone into a psychedelic state before, it was just really eye-opening. So it kind of just made me realize like the potential there of psychedelics, because I can't remember the exact like insights or whatever I had from that journey in particular, but it was definitely beneficial to me. Like I felt like it was useful and valuable. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'd love to explore that more. And that really kind of started my journey, I'd say. And so I I say I experimented here and there with a few other substances. Um, and yeah, like I said, continually found them to be really valuable, especially for personal growth. And that's always been the angle that I've come at psychedelics with. So I'd say that's a big part of also kind of where I've got to today, is like really trying to focus. I guess I have a passion for like personal development and self-actualization. So that's been something that I've tried to work on myself. And then that's kind of transitioned into then like a path towards spirituality and developing that. And so after high school and going into university, I went through a bit of a up and down spiritual path. Like I felt like I kind of started to become a new person. I started to realize like parts of myself that were no longer serving me, or parts that I didn't really identify with anymore. And I think some of that came from some of it definitely came from using psychedelics, but I wouldn't say that's the only thing. I also traveled quite a bit by myself, and I think that's was also a really big eye opener for me. And so with the combination of those things, I ended up coming back to university, and so I studied at UBC here in Vancouver, the University of British Columbia, and I actually met some people who were running something called the UBC Psychedelic Society. And
Mm.
so up until that point, I'd say all of my interest in psychedelics was really personal, and it was kind of focused on me. But then I realized that with this club, it was my first time interacting with people that were putting that focus kind of outside of themselves and trying to make something significant. And they were talking about the research that was happening. They were focused on bringing in speakers and events. And I just thought, hey, this is a really cool group of people that are actually focused on these things in a academic and scientific way. And so once I realized that there was an outlet for me to actually, for this passion to go into something like that's more proper and professional, and that's something that maybe my parents would approve of, I was like, all in, and so, or not all in, but I decided to like help out, and so I ended up becoming the president of that club for 3 years after those
Yeah.
execs left. And so essentially for most of my undergrad and university, I was running this club, and it was always something I was doing on the side. So like I said, I wasn't fully jumping into it, but it was definitely a really big learning path for me. Like it was something that allowed me to connect with lots of people. And I would say that it also allowed me to get my foot in the door in some ways with Maps Canada, who I currently work with. And that's because we actually collaborated together on some events. So I'd say, yeah, that's kind of a summary of the overall path and kind of where I ended up now,
Yeah.
within the space.
Well, definitely some questions for you just in that story alone. So first, kind of hearing that it is psychedelics in combination to like world traveling, especially by yourself, that kind of opened you up to that spiritual journey. I would say that definitely traveling alone had definitely started me on my path, and
Mm,
psychedelics is what helped me deep into it. Totally.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
resonate with that too.
So
Yeah.
besides shrooms, what else have you tried?
Let's see. So besides mushrooms, I've tried LSD. I have tried cannabis. I count that as a psychedelic too. I've tried MDMA. I have tried different forms of psilocybin, like synthetic psilocybin and drops and whatnot. I've tried 5-MeO DMT, and let's see. I've tried a 3-MMC.
What's that?
Uh, 3-MMC is it's an empathogen like MDMA,
Mhm.
except it's a little bit. It's very heart opening, but it's less kind of clouded with love sensation. So MDMA is very lovey, touchy feely. I like to kind of think about it, and 3-MMC is more clear and like talkative. So it's really great for talk therapy, and it's also really nice for speaking your truth. So 3-MMC I think is a great therapeutic substance. But yeah, it's like it's chemically very similar to MDMA, but
Yeah.
just slightly different. And then let's see. I think those might be all of them. Maybe I'm missing one or two, but yeah, haven't tried peyote yet, haven't done ayahuasca yet, and haven't done NMDMT yet, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. So yeah, interested and intrigued about those things.
Wow, I gotta look up that 3-MMC. Like that sounds
Yeah,
fun. Yeah.
yeah, check it out. It is kind of cool for
But
sure.
what is your so now that you've tried like a whole gamut of them, what's your go-to? What's your favorite one?
That's a hard question to answer, I guess, because I think it really depends what kind of experience I'm looking for.
Mhm.
Um, if in the summer, for example, this past summer, I went to some raves and I went to Shambhala, which is a music festival here. For something like that, when I'm in a big group of people in a really high stimulus place, and I am sharing it with someone else, I probably would want to focus on something like MDMA or something like LSD, or
Mhm.
and potentially them together. I
Mhm.
think that's kind of an interesting combination, and it's very like external. But if I'm looking to have more of an internal journey and to like really focus on my roots and like grounding with myself and maybe have a more spiritual experience, then I
Mhm.
would say mushrooms is probably my go-to there.
Right. That makes sense. Depends on the occasion and who you're with.
Yeah, it depends on the occasion who I'm with. And then I'd say in terms of my practice, like in terms of offering psychedelic substances to others in ceremonial spaces, and in the role of a facilitator, I'm lately I've been leaning more towards 5-MeO DMT, and I mean that in a sense like that's what I've mostly been offering and working with. And I think there's a couple reasons for that, but yeah, that's also a really interesting and powerful medicine that I'm um, really impressed by and think has a lot of therapeutic potential too.
For sure. Wow, that's like that's so crazy to me. Like 5-MeO is probably one of the more intense ones I've ever had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's the most intense that you can have. I don't think there's any other psychedelic that is out there that is as intense as it. So
Mhm.
that's partially why I think it's really intriguing.
Yeah, for sure. Can you tell us a little bit more about so like I guess like outside of maps, can you tell us more about your offerings as a practitioner? Like what kind of people do you help? What do you do in the ceremonies and whatnot? And then also talking a bit about the flying sage.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, there's kind of two things there. So, I mean, with the my underground practice, I'd say that first and foremost, I am new to the space and I am still getting acquainted with what it means to be an underground practitioner. I've been kind of sitting on the outside of the underground space for a while now because Maps kind of straddles it in some ways. Like Maps is related to it, but for the most part, Maps is sitting outside of it. And so I've kind of always seen it from afar. Um, when I was younger, I've always been and oftentimes played facilitating roles with friends. So I'd say that's kind of where my facilitation um, role started, is just by offering these things to friends, or when friends are wanting to do it. Like sometimes I would step in as a trip sitter, as like the sober one, the designated driver of the journey, to say the least. And so that's where things started. And then I think about a couple years ago, 2 years ago now, I started to, yeah, like offer this. I started to just trip sit other people that weren't necessarily close friends, but people that had kind of met me, and just for whatever reason, like asked me to be their trip sitter. And I remember at the time, like when I look back on it now, like I definitely had some trepidation, but I just decided to kind of go with it and dipping my toes in that space and seeing if it's something that kind of resonated with me, and if it's something that I could do in a well, and like in a solid, professional, ethical, and integral way. And it turned out to be the case that it did align a lot with me, and the people that I was doing this work with really appreciated it and had some really transformational experiences. And that made me think, wow, like this, like I just really loved how rewarding the work was, like not only for the people that I was doing it with, but for me too. Like when you share that experience with people, it's really quite amazing. And I'd say one other thing is like what kind of led me in that direction as well is that kind of I've always had a harm reduction angle. For a long time, I've been a lifeguard. So since I was like 12, I've been a lifeguard, which is something I didn't really think about until recently. But like that kind of makes me wonder, what type of harm reduction angle I bring as well, because I mean, lifeguarding is essentially just all about harm reduction in a certain ways. And then I've also done harm reduction in a psychedelic setting. So I have gone to festivals here in BC, in Envision, and other places where I have actually done festival harm reduction. So
Mm,
those experiences, coupled with my background in psychology, so I did study psychology in university. I studied cognitive systems, cognitive science, and then coupled with my work with maps, and also just like my desire to like connect with people and really um, help them achieve transformative experiences that I have. I'd say those are like kind of the seeds for my decision to step into that world. And now I'd say I'm still learning, but I'm also like I have some processes and procedures now that I'm like confident are really strong and have delivered really good results. And yeah, I'm really happy about the work that I'm doing there.
amazing. Two questions for you in relation to
Yep.
that. So lifeguard at the age of 12. So is that like the youngest, like a minimum age? You got to be 12-year-olds to save people's lives. Is like,
No, yeah, it's fine. I could be wrong. Maybe it's a couple of years later, but I remember really early on in my childhood, like starting the courses. So I wasn't actually a lifeguard when I was 12, but I meant like to become a lifeguard, it's actually, you do have to take a bunch of classes that take a while. And so you have to take, they're called like bronze star, bronze medallion, bronze cross, NLS. There's like a bunch of courses that you have to take, and they usually take quite a while, and you take them kind of spread out. So I started training as a lifeguard when I was like, yeah, really young, 12, 13, something like that. And then by the time I was 16, I started working as a lifeguard. And then that was a job that got me all the way through to university until just recently, when like this past summer was the first summer I didn't work as a lifeguard.
oh, wow. Did you do that all here in Vancouver or back in England?
No, nothing in England. It was all here in Vancouver. Yeah. And I worked at multiple different pools and with different, like with the city of Vancouver and also at UBC and stuff.
Oh, crazy. Trip sitting. So what can you tell us a bit about like what is like if I were to be a trip sitter or if somebody is new to trip sitting, what is kind of like trip sitting 101?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think trip sitting 101, the first things to recognize are, um, first it's helpful to become familiar with some of the language around trip sitting. So holding space is a really key term that gets thrown around quite a lot in different contexts, but it's really important in the context of trip sitting. And
Mhm.
so really, I think when you're trip sitting effectively, it comes down to how do you hold space effectively. I think a lot of the time, depending on the medicine that you work with and what your intentions are, it's really important when you're trip sitting to actually be less active than maybe you think. So I think non-action is really important. And it's and developing the confidence in yourself to step into a space and not necessarily get your hands into what is happening, figuratively. So like you kind of want to be there as a witness to what's happening, and it's this delicate balance between being a witness and not being engaged and part of this person's experience, but also being there to reflect when necessary what is going on with them. So really, it's like seeing yourself holding space effectively. One aspect of that can be like um, developing yourself to be kind of like a mirror in some ways. You're wanting to neutrally reflect back what people are experiencing, and there's lots that comes with that, right? Like people can often project things onto you as you're in the space with people like this, right? And so it's important to not necessarily like take the form of things that get projected onto you. It's more so to let them pass through you. And so you become this kind of translucent like being in a sense, where things in the space and energy is really just flowing through you, and you're just there trying to hold safety. And so maybe to wrap up this point, I would just say like a really big key for trip sitting is safety. If someone is wanting, I mean, at the end of the day, the whole reason why anyone would ask someone to be a trip sitter is because they want safety, right? Like someone who doesn't care about their safety probably isn't getting a trip sitter. So when we think about the safety concept, it's really important because when you feel safe to explore, like when you feel safe in your physical environment, then you feel a lot more safe to explore your internal environment. And I think that's the key thing is as is creating a space where your client or the person or your friend or whoever you're in, whatever context you're in, making them feel extremely safe with you, with the environment, and with the substance that you guys are working with, to the point where they feel so comfortable to let go and surrender. Because as everyone, as most people listening to this probably know, like such a key part of the psychedelic experience is surrendering
Mhm.
and allowing. And that's really hard to do if you're feeling physically unsafe.
Yes.
So yeah, that's a big thing.
Can you give us a practical example of not getting pulled into whatever they're projecting and just letting that pass through you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, sometimes, depending on what medicine you're working with, there can be like oftentimes unconscious or conscious reactions to the medicine in the body and all sorts of things, right? You can get with 5-MeO, for example, you can get screaming, laughing, like crying, flailing, all sorts of movements and reactions. And to be honest, some of the times these reactions can be kind of bizarre, and so it can be maybe your first inclination could be to kind of laugh, for example, in some situations. And I've definitely been in that situation. But it's important to really try and be neutral again. And so not letting these things that are happening in front of you with this person, like in a typical situation, you might have certain reactions, but as a trip sitter and someone who's effectively holding space, it's really important and sometimes hard to just allow something that might be really funny, like someone sticking their tongue out at you and like twisting their head and like kind of saying some gibberish, like in a normal situation that would be weird and bizarre and funny, but in the situation like this, like yeah, I got to hold space for that and recognize that it's there's literally some magical healing magic going on in this moment. And whether or not you it looks like that, it most likely is that. And so it's a matter of yeah, being there and not allowing that to kind of overtake your emotions yourself. So that's one example, and I can think of another example if you want, but that's a
So,
good one, I'd say.
so in that case, as the trip sitter, would I just not respond to it?
Well, I think it depends, and then it gets into like it's case by case basis and situation to situation. I don't think there's one rule for any one situation, and that's also a really big tenet I'd say of good space holding is like you got to recognize that there is no like one size fits all solution for things that are happening. I mean, there's some guidelines, but like it really depends. Like maybe in some instances, it actually might be the right thing to do might be to kind of a little like laugh along and
Mm,
like help raise the energy with laughter, because laughter is it's a great energy and it reflects a certain type of emotion, usually joy, right? So
yeah.
if someone's experiencing joy and you kind of reflect that back to them, that can be awesome. But let's say maybe they're experiencing turmoil or like despair of some sorts, and they're then they're making I don't know, some interesting faces or something, and then you laugh. Well, now it doesn't really feel like you're laughing with them and raising things up. Now it just feels like you're laughing at them, and
Right.
you're coming in with like a joy laughter vibe, and they're coming at you with a despair
Mhm.
vibe, and those don't match. So I think it's yeah about matching the emotional valence of the reaction, I guess.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
Could you talk to us a bit about the flying sage?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple years ago, I started the Flying Sage with my sister. It was at the time a side hustle that I started in university, um, and it was a clothing brand. So our goal was to really try to reduce the stigma around psychedelics by offering sophisticated clothing pieces that allowed people to represent that they liked psychedelics, but it wasn't in like a tie. It wasn't like tie dye or anything like that. I'm actually wearing one of our pieces now. So this is the kind of stuff that we would do.
Nice.
This is like our press reset design. So it's,
Oh,
you know
but
what, it's, this one's a little bit extra because it's like on the front like this. We actually don't sell this one anymore, but essentially this was the kind of stuff that we were doing. It was just like toned down apparel. And so that went on for a little while, but now over the last year and a half or so, my sister and I have been collaborating and discussing and talking about switching from our business to focus on community. So we're still doing the clothing thing and you can find our store and whatnot, but we're actually really focused now on community building. And so I can get more into that. We officially launched the community just coming out of the summer this past year. So in I guess it was at the end of August. And essentially what we're trying to do with the Flying Sage overall is we're trying to build psychedelic community. And our guiding principle as we build this community is to democratize transcendence. And so for me, what I've recognized, especially with working with maps and just looking at the landscape ahead, psychedelics are, it's going to be hard for them to be accessible to everyone. And with like most treatments, you know, in the medical field, like as treatments get more advanced and complex, they can get more expensive. And psychedelics are like really complex and advanced, I'd say, technology. And so it's, you know, we're seeing now how the healthcare system and for-profit companies are coming in to kind of capitalize and utilize these technologies. And it's looking, I wouldn't say it's looking grim, but it's just looking like it will be difficult for people who can't afford, who don't have necessarily a lot of money to be able to afford a proper safe treatment. And so my proposed solution to this is that we really got to focus on community, because in community, that's where we can all come together and share best practices. We can lean on one another. And I think at the end of the day, like a lot of people don't necessarily need to go to a clinic or anything and pay thousands of dollars to get therapy. If they have someone that they trust in their life or a couple people, those people, when trained from a harm reduction angle to offer, like trained on how to hold space or just the basics, like we went over, and you were asking, right, like the basics of trip sitting, like if more and more people were educated on those type of things, I think it could become more of a normal activity for people to engage in psychedelics, and they wouldn't feel scared, they wouldn't feel isolated. But that's the case right now. And so my goal with the Flying Sage is really to get rid of the isolation and to improve connection in the psychedelic community, so that anyone who comes in and is curious about taking psychedelics, they don't have to go straight to a clinic, um, to have this experience. Maybe they first want to come to the community and see what other people are doing, make friends, and like find a group to trip with, you know, as opposed to going to a clinic. And maybe they end up deciding to go to a clinic. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I think there's room for both, and clinics are really important, especially for treating, you know, severe mental health conditions. But then even for them, it becomes okay. Well, after they've gone to a clinic, now people need integration assistance as well. And so that's another area where the Flying Sage is trying to focus on. So I kind of rambled a bit there, but essentially the Flying Sage is a psychedelic community, and we're focusing on democratizing transcendence.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's so important. I think like currently how I see it anyways, the landscape is, you know, even though we're making great strides around the world about decriminalization and legalization, there's still such this huge like public stigma, like social
Mhm.
stigma about it. And that has kind of kept everything very, very hush hush. And that's why most of practitioners are still underground, right?
Mhm.
And because of that, and I would say maybe like 10 or 20 years ago, there wasn't so much resource online, like free resource online that we can read about and learn about like different psychedelics. What is set and setting? What is harm reduction? What is holding space and all that? But it is all available now. And so I think it's also just like bringing awareness to um, the education piece of it. It's like it's out there. Let
Mhm.
you know, self learn. Let's self study and all that. But then at the same time, that social stigma is quite strong. So I'm
It
really
is, yeah.
one day I really want to see that really toned down and what we're doing being normalized.
Yeah, for sure. I share that vision too, for sure. And it is crazy how much stigma there is. It's too bad. It makes sense, but yeah, it's I think it's time to start fighting that a little bit.
Definitely, yeah. I'm still having conversations with people, including friends, who like the first thought when I talk about psychedelics, it's like, oh, so like you went to a rave or like you doing it at a party or you were at a concert. I'm like, Actually, no. I was like in a room by myself in the dark, or like I was, rented a mansion in Mexico with my friends over the weekend, and we all did it together. And basically,
Mhm.
we were playing therapists for each other. But
Right.
yeah, I don't think they quite understand the therapeutic purposes behind it. But
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a really good point. I'm noticing the same thing too with friends and people that I'm like relatively close with too. So I know like if people that are close to me are not necessarily seeing psychedelics in a just way,
Mhm.
uh, then I can imagine that the wider people that I don't know at all, like of course it's going to be even more challenging.
100%. That brings me to another question. What would you say is the biggest misconception the people, the public, have about being a psychedelic practitioner?
That's a good question. I feel like it's tricky to answer because I feel like the general public doesn't even know what a psychedelic practitioner is. So I'd say that's the biggest misconception is that the public has no idea that that even exists yet.
Mhm.
And I think if they were even if they were to see like someone offering ketamine in a clinic, which is like kind of the right now like the main legal option available, right? I'd say most people would be hesitant to even label that person as a psychedelic practitioner, right?
Yeah.
Like they're probably think of them as a doctor offering ketamine. But yeah, I'd say a better answer to your question though might be that assuming that lots of people don't know what a psychedelic practitioner is, I would say the biggest misconception is that there's few of them, like there's not that many of them. And I guess on the grand scheme of things, when you compare to doctors and chiros and RMTs and whatever, like there's not that many psychedelic practitioners. But I would also caveat that by saying that in certain cities, um, including Vancouver and Toronto, Montreal, like big cities in Canada, at least I know for sure, and I'm sure also in LA and Chicago. I know like a bunch of cities, Denver, and lots of these big cities. There is a really budding and flourishing underground community. So I would just say the misconception might be that there's no one out there doing this and that it's very hard to access. But I think if you take a few steps out of your way to try and just find a couple people in the network underground,
Mhm.
once you get down there, you'll notice, wow, there's so many people down here doing this work.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the biggest misconceptions, I think.
I think that's a really good answer, and I totally agree. It's like once you get into the community, then you'll see, oh, right, right, like it's all here. It's just not like at this level, just because, well, hello, it's not legal yet, so
Yeah,
that's why we're
exactly,
underground.
exactly.
Amazing. What would you say is a trend that you see happening in our psychedelic space right now?
That's a good question too. Let's see, a trend that's happening in the psychedelic space.
Mhm.
Well, hmm.
And then, are you for it or against it?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm having trouble thinking about an answer to this one for some reason. A trend. Let's see. There's probably so many different trends.
Mhm.
Um, well, I'd say one trend I'd say that is coming about in the psychedelic space now is mushrooms in general. I feel like but it's like I'd say specifically like functional mushrooms is becoming a trend. And I think there's an interesting, maybe it's not precisely within the psychedelic space, but it kind of has this cool bridge. And maybe that's why I'll mention it because I feel like there's this really strong trend now towards functional mushrooms. People are coming out with products that allow you to replace certain things that you might normally have, different supplements that you might normally take with functional mushrooms, which have been shown to be really beneficial for things like you know, neuron activation and neuroplasticity and like increasing neurons in the brain and things like this, and also just like cardiovascular health, all sorts of things. And so, although it's not really it's not necessarily the psychedelic mushrooms we're talking about. I think there's just this big interest growing in mushrooms, and then people are starting to kind of spill over into the psychedelic space through that avenue. So I'd say that yeah, functional mushrooms is a really interesting trend. I think it's really starting to go up in lots of different areas, and I'm definitely for it because I think it means that more people are gonna fall in love with the magic of mushrooms. And mushrooms are so amazing. If any of you out there listening haven't seen Fantastic Fungi, I would really go check it out. It's this really, really awesome movie on Netflix that kind of is like a bit of a documentary and it talks about functional mushrooms, but it also really does focus on the psychedelic side. And so it's a cool bridge.
Amazing, amazing. Thank
Yeah.
you for bringing that up. Um,
Yeah.
what specific functional mushrooms have you heard about?
Let's see. Okay. So we got reishi and we got lion's mane. Those are kind of two of the main ones. I'm
Yeah.
definitely turkey tail is another one. Um, I probably heard of a few other ones, but those are definitely the main ones. Yeah, lion's mane, turkey tail, and reishi. are all shown to be really beneficial for different things. I know in particular, lion's mane is the one that I've um, heard a lot of good research around, um, showing that it could be really good for preventing and potentially kind of treating things like Alzheimer's and dementia,
Mm.
which really hits home for me because my grandpa had dementia for the end of his life, and it was really challenging for him and for my family. And when I think about my own parents, like I know that that sort of thing runs in the family, and it's also really widespread these days. I think there's some crazy statistics about dementia, and a lot of people are um, unfortunately affected by it. So yeah, something that really a really simple remedy could be something like um, lion's mane mushroom, where right now we don't actually have any medications for um, something like Alzheimer's.
Mm. I think I know what you're getting your family for Christmas.
Yeah, right.
Here's a bunch of mushrooms, mom. um, I actually, those are the three that I've heard of as well.
Okay.
Lion's mane and reishi, and reishi is actually looked up the Chinese name for it, and it's actually a ingredient that we use in like soup.
Oh, interesting. That's cool.
Yeah,
Never heard that using
yeah.
that way before.
Yeah, look in my kitchen cupboard to see if I have it. So what is next for you in life or business or like on your path?
um, I'd say right now I'm just really focused on the flying sage primarily, um, but also on my work with maps. So the two of these things are like my main thing. I mean, I work full time right now with maps, so I'd say that's my primary focus.
Mm.
But I'm looking ahead towards next year. At some point, I'm going to want to, I think, focus more on my business, and so I'll make a bit of a transition of sorts. But right now, focusing on maps, focusing on getting things back online. We went through a bit of a transition period with our leadership, so yeah, really looking to focus on establishing some new systems and processes, and also just helping to um, bring our volunteer programming back on, because that's in a large part a lot of our organizations focused on that. And then with the Flying Sage, my focus is on to continue really building a strong hub here in Vancouver with the Flying Sage, and then figure out how I can potentially scale it and move it to other cities too that might benefit. So yeah, those are kind of the main things I'm focused on, with the practitioner side of things being a separate, almost a separate brand now. I'm actually working under the brand of Legacy Journeys for for any of the work that I'm doing underground as a practitioner, but that's not really as big of a focus right now.
Yeah, sounds good. I guess we never really touched on your work at Maps that much actually, and I don't know if are you privy to talk about that?
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, if you could tell us a bit more about like, well, what is Maps Canada's initiatives? Like, what are the plans to, yeah, what are their plans for like the next year or so? And then also, how can
Yeah,
we help?
Yeah, for sure. So, MAPS, for anyone that hasn't heard of the company before, or the nonprofit, it is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And so I worked for MAPS Canada, which was started in 2011. But MAPS in the US, or the headquarters, they started in 1968. So MAPS is actually one of the oldest psychedelic brands around. They actually are the oldest psychedelic brand in a way. And so
Mhm.
they've been doing this work now for a long time. And as I mentioned, they're a nonprofit. And so what their main focus is raising money to fund psychedelic research, particularly looking at how MDMA can be used to treat things like post-traumatic stress disorder. So they've been really successful at this, and the method that they've been approaching and trying to tackle, um, making psychedelics more accessible, um, through the way that they've been trying to do this is by bringing a drug to market. So they're looking at MDMA as an illegal substance, which it is, but they're, instead of figuring out how to decriminalize it, they're actually trying to figure out how to make it a legal medicine. And so that's been MAPS's main focus. And this is a really lengthy process, and it's also very costly. And so that's why MAPS has been kind of plodding away at their mission now for like close to 40 years.
Wow.
And they're having a lot of success now. Like they've been able to raise over like $100 million from completely public donations, right? Like the government doesn't fund MAPS or any of the work that they do. So that's why it's important that all this money is donated from businesses, other organizations, individuals. Everyone who's passionate about psychedelics have been donating it to MAPS, and they've now gotten MDMA past phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, to the point now where in 2023 you're most likely going to see MDMA become a legal medicine. So that means that you can go to your doctor, and they might be able to prescribe you MDMA And it might, and yeah, we're unsure exactly like what exactly that would look like. There's still things that they're figuring out. But yeah, you'd essentially be able to have access to MDMA in a legal way. So that's really exciting, and that's kind of what MAPS is focusing on. And because that's kind of coming to a head now, and also because the space is really opening up, MAPS has the liberty of stepping into a bit of a leadership role as well in the space. So they're looking to do other things as well. I know MAPS in the US does a lot of advocacy. So does MAPS Canada. We do a lot of education, webinars, things like this. So we aren't just focused on research, but I would predict that in the next 5 years, MAPS Canada itself is going to be probably leaning more towards focusing on research, just because now there's so many other people doing other things. We kind of got to find our niche, and I think our niche is going to be being a hub for research, or at least that's what we're thinking about at the moment.
That's super interesting. I didn't know 2023. I mean, that's great. Like it's so like within reach. Like we're almost at 2022. Like so basically it's
I,
like a year and a half away.
yeah,
Wow.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's exciting, right?
Oh, for sure. So excited. I think a lot of things will change definitely in the next like 3 to 5 years in our space. So I'm really excited to be part of it. Um,
Yeah.
I had a question, but I forgot. But it's okay. Okay, before we go into the lightning round, where can our listeners connect with you online?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So the best place depends what you're interested in, but if you're interested in hearing more about Maps Canada, you can find us on our website, mapscanada.org. You can also find information about the Flying Sage at our website, so www.theflyingsage.ca. And if folks want to connect with me personally, you can message us on our Instagram page for the Flying Sage, or you can reach me at my personal Instagram too. You can just search Manifest It Man, and you'll find me on there.
Amazing. Okay, so lightning round. This is how it works. I'm going to ask a series of questions, and you can answer with the first thing that comes to mind in one word or one sentence.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yes.
Okay. Can you lucid dream?
No.
What's your hidden talent?
Uh, Juggling.
Oh, okay. Didn't know. Water, fire, wind, earth, or metal?
Fire.
What's the latest lesson that you learned?
To try and live life as embodied as possible.
Hmm. Who's your hero?
Mm. Master Chief.
Who's that?
He's from this video game called Halo.
Okay. Okay. I was like, well, I don't know who this guy is. Okay. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Mm. Flight.
Okay. What's next on your bucket list?
To travel to Australia.
Oh, okay. What's there?
A really good friend of mine and son, and new places to explore, and wildlife and surfing and lifeguarding, and I don't know. Sounds like lots of cool stuff there, but I don't really know. Never
Yeah.
been there.
What's your spirit animal?
um, Depends how I'm feeling, but right now I feel like an eagle.
Okay. What resonates with you?
Well, it kind of relates, I guess, to my desire for my ability to be flight. I mean, I've always kind of resonated with eagles, but I just really like how majestic they are, and kind of they always give off um, a bit of a like calm demeanor. Like I feel like they're because they're like an apex predator, so they don't have anyone trying to kill them. They're just like chilling, so
Yeah.
they're just like hanging out and like not worried about things. So I kind of like that vibe.
Like they're just chilling and they also do the killing. So
Yeah, they do the killing, and it seems like they're pretty good at that. But at least they don't have to worry about, yeah, other birds like killing them. They're just like they know what's up. They're like in their power. So
yeah,
that's what um I resonate with the eagle.
good one. They're in their power. I like that. Okay. What's your favorite quote?
Um, One that comes to mind right now is from Terence McKenna, psychedelic quote too. So he says that actually isn't specifically psychedelic, but he says that the the notion that he says that you have to take seriously the notion that understanding the universe is your responsibility, because the only understanding of the universe that will be helpful for you is your own understanding.
Mm, isn't that true?
It is true. Yeah, I resonate with that one a lot, I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. What do you want the world to know?
I want the world to know that inside we're all one. We're all part of the same um, light source, and we're all stemming from the same source, and the source is love. And it can be hard to recognize that sometimes, but at the end of the day, I think we're all brothers and sisters, and we're all inhabiting this planet that we need to save because
Mm.
it's dying. Yeah, that's what I want the world to know.
That's a good message. For sure. Cool. Well, that wraps up this episode. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story with us and for being an inspiration to all of the aspiring liberated leaders out there. And thank you for all the work that you do, Michael.
Thanks,
Cool.
thanks, B. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
My pleasure. I'll catch you soon.
Okay, bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Akita Agency. We transform overwhelmed healers into liberated leaders with our signature Akita Liberation Loop method. We help psychedelic therapists and coaches evolve from a one-to-one to a one-to-many client model by co-creating evergreen funnels that lead to online courses and group coaching programs. We have a special gift for our listeners, a complimentary, bite-sized training series to level up your evergreen funnel knowledge. If you're not familiar with or feel overwhelmed with marketing, sales, and funnels, then this training is for you. Just go to akitaagency.com/tutorial. Thank you for listening to the Liberated Leader podcast. If you found value in today's episode, then please, 1, leave us a positive review, share it with a friend. 2, join our tribe on social. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time, to your liberation and beyond.